Constantinople, 1875. The most powerful empire across 3 continents has just declared something unthinkable: bankruptcy. It wasn't enemy armies, it wasn't a plague, it wasn't a revolution, it was debt. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire had been invincible. It controlled the trade routes between Europe and Asia. Its currency was as reliable as gold. Its armies made kings tremble. But in 1875, Sultan Abdul Hamid II had to do the unthinkable: suspend payment of external debt. More than 50% of the empire's budget went to paying interest. The government had lost control of its own economy. And here's what's terrifying. Today, the United States dedicates 13% of its budget just to debt interest. China has tripled its debt in a decade. Europe is trapped in a cycle of stimulus and bailouts. The story of the Ottoman Empire isn't just history, it's a prophecy, and it's about to repeat itself. Before we continue, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. To understand how the Ottoman Empire fell, you first need to understand how indestructible it was. In 1453, Mehmed II does something Europe considered impossible. He conquers Constantinople. The city that had resisted 1,000 years of attacks falls in 53 days. The Byzantine Empire, direct heir of Rome, ceases to exist. The Ottomans don't just conquer, they build. In less than a century, they control 3 continents, from the gates of Vienna to the coasts of Yemen, from Algeria to Baghdad. A quarter of the world's population lives under their flag or trades with their currency. Their financial system is revolutionary for the era. The akçe, their silver coin, is accepted from Venice to Persia. European merchants prefer Ottoman bills of exchange to those of their own kings. Why? Because the empire pays its debts, always. The tax collection system is brutal but efficient. The taimar, a system where soldiers receive land in exchange for military service, eliminates the need for a costly standing army. The janissaries, the empire's military elite, are loyal to the death. In 1520, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire reaches its zenith. Vienna is under siege. The Mediterranean is an Ottoman lake. Culture, art, architecture flourish. The Blue Mosque and Topkapi Palace are marvels that Europe cannot match. But behind the glory, something deadly was growing in silence. The first mistake had already been made, and no one saw it. The year is 1580. Sultan Murad III faces a problem that no conqueror can solve with swords: imported inflation. Spain, flooded with gold and silver from the Americas, destabilizes global markets. Prices skyrocket throughout the Mediterranean, but the Ottoman Empire, which has no colonies in the New World, suffers without benefiting. The Sultan's response is fatal. He devalues the akçe. In 1580, a coin that had maintained its value for 150 years loses 44% of its silver content. The Ottomans mint copper and call it silver. It's the first step toward the abyss. Merchants aren't foolish. Immediately prices adjust. What cost 1 akçe now costs 2. The government responds by devaluing again, and again, and again. In 50 years, the akçe loses 80% of its value, but devaluation isn't the only problem. It's just the symptom. The real cancer is structural. The janissaries, who were once an elite force of 20,000 soldiers, are now 100,000. Why? Because the Sultan, politically weak, needs to buy loyalties. The janissaries are no longer ascetic warriors. They're a privileged class demanding salaries, pensions, bribes. The taimar system collapses. Soldiers no longer want land, they want cash. The empire needs to create a standing army, paid in currency. But the currency is devalued, so it needs more soldiers to collect more taxes, which needs more money to pay. It's the beginning of the death spiral. And then comes the most dangerous temptation of all: foreign credit. Crimean War. The Ottoman Empire allies with France and Great Britain against Russia. It's an expensive war. Very expensive. And for the first time in its history, the Sultan does something revolutionary and suicidal. He borrows from foreign banks. The first Ottoman loan in European markets is for £3 million. The bankers of London and Paris are euphoric. Finally, the empire modernizes. It integrates into the European financial system, but the terms are brutal. 6% annual interest plus 20% commissions. Of the $3 million loaned, the empire only receives $2.4 million. The rest goes to intermediaries. And what does the Sultan do with the money? Spends it on war, spends it on palaces, spends it on bribing officials. doesn't invest in infrastructure, doesn't modernize the economy, doesn't reform the tax system. When the loan comes due, there's no money to pay. The solution? Take another loan to pay the first one. Between 1854 and 1875, the Ottoman Empire borrows more than £200 million sterling. It's an astronomical figure for the era, equivalent to the empire's annual budget multiplied by 15. But here's the problem. Revenues don't grow. Taxes remain the same. The economy doesn't modernize. Industry doesn't develop. By 1875, 50% of the empire's budget goes to paying debt interest. Not principal, just interest. Every akçe collected in taxes in Anatolia goes straight to banks in London. Soldiers don't receive salaries. Officials don't get paid. Roads crumble. But European bankers collect punctually. Until one day there's no more money, and Sultan Abdul Hamid II has to pronounce the word no empire wants to pronounce: default. That's where the empire began to die, and no one noticed until it was too late. October 1875. The Ottoman Empire announces it will only pay 50% of its debt obligations. It's the first default of an empire in the modern era of capitalism. European financial markets panic. Ottoman bonds, which were trading at 90% of their nominal value, plummet to 20%. Thousands of French and British investors lose their savings. But this still wasn't the worst part. European bankers demand guarantees. If the empire can't pay, then it must surrender control of its finances. In 1881, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration is created, an institution controlled by foreign creditors. What does this mean in practical terms? It means the empire no longer controls its own revenues. Taxes from the richest provinces, Egypt, Syria, the Balkans, go straight to this administration. The Sultan only receives what's left over. If anything is left over, it's the loss of sovereignty in real time, and the people feel it. Taxes rise, wages fall, inflation devours savings, the Janissaries without pay rebel. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II has to massacre his own military elite. 30,000 Janissaries killed in one day. The empire is at war with itself, but the final blow was still to come. Provinces begin to separate. Greece gains independence in 1821, Serbia in 1835, Romania in 1877, Bulgaria in 1878. Each independence means loss of territory, loss of tax revenue, loss of resources. The empire contracts. Revenues fall, but the debt doesn't disappear. Interest keeps accumulating. Now the empire has less territory but the same debt. The economy enters depression. Ottoman merchants can't compete with mass-produced European products. The textile industry, which had been the empire's pride, collapses before cheap cotton from Manchester. Cities fill with the unemployed. The countryside impoverishes. The middle class disappears. Only two groups remain: an obscenely wealthy elite connected to foreign credit, and an impoverished mass without hope. It's the classic picture of economic collapse. Extreme inequality, loss of social mobility, political polarization, and then comes the 20th century, and with it, World War I. The Ottoman Empire commits its last fatal mistake. It allies with Germany in World War I. It's a desperate gamble. The empire is bankrupt. European powers call it the sick man of Europe. Ottoman leaders think a German victory will restore their lost glory. They lose. And the price is total. Imagine the scene: Istanbul, 1918. British and French troops occupy the city. The Sultan is a puppet. The army is dissolved. The economy is destroyed. The currency is worthless. A kilo of bread costs what a house used to cost. Markets are empty. Factories closed. Ottoman warships, which once dominated the Mediterranean, are rusting in the harbor. But the final humiliation comes in 1920. The Treaty of Sèvres. European powers divide the empire like a cake. France takes Syria and Lebanon. Britain takes Iraq and Palestine. Greece takes parts of Anatolia. Italy takes coastal zones. The Ottoman Empire, which controlled 3 continents for 600 years, is reduced to a piece of land around Ankara. Its total dissolution, the annihilation of a system that believed itself eternal, currencies turning to dust, empty palaces, armies without pay, an economy reduced to barter. It's the visual and emotional collapse of everything that was once great, and the world watches and learns, or should. Now comes the uncomfortable part. Because everything you just read isn't just ancient history, it's the operating manual for modern superpowers. Let's look at the numbers. Ottoman Empire, 1875. 50% of budget goes to debt interest payments, total dependence on foreign credit, loss of control over tax revenues, continuous devaluation of currency. United States, 2025. 13% of federal budget goes to debt interest and rising. National debt of $35 trillion. China holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1913. China, 2025. Total debt, public plus private, of 280% of GDP. Real estate crisis. With over 50 developers in default dependence on debt-financed investment banking system with hidden toxic assets. Europe, 2025. Average public debt of 90% of GDP. Italy, with debt of 145% of GDP. European banking system sustained by ECB with negative rates, anemic economic growth. See the pattern? The Ottomans thought they were too big to fail, that their strategic geographic position made them indispensable, that they could always take another loan to pay the previous one. Today the United States thinks the dollar will always be the world's reserve currency. China thinks it can grow eternally with debt. Europe thinks it can spend without reforming. They're the same illusions, the same comforting lies. And today, we're repeating the same story. Only the names of the currencies have changed. But there's a critical difference between 1875 and 2025, the scale. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it affected 20 million people. When the modern global economy collapses, it will affect 8 billion. The Ottomans didn't have financial derivatives. They didn't have high-frequency trading. They didn't have cryptocurrencies. They didn't have a global financial system so interconnected that the collapse of a bank in Switzerland can trigger panic in Tokyo. The fragility is exponentially greater. The connections are more complex. The risks are systemic, and no one is prepared. Here's the truth governments don't want you to understand. External debt isn't just a number on a balance sheet. It's sovereignty sold on installments. Every loan a country takes from foreign creditors is a piece of its future mortgaged. Every interest payment is national wealth transferred to others. Every debt restructuring is another piece of independence lost. The Ottomans learned this the hardest way possible. In 1881, when the Ottoman Public Debt Administration was created, the empire officially lost control of its destiny. European bankers decided which provinces could collect taxes, which infrastructure projects were financed, which economic policies were implemented. The Sultan remained on the throne. The flag still flew, but the real power was in London and Paris. It's the same pattern we see today with the IMF and World Bank. Countries that request emergency loans and then must implement structural reforms dictated from Washington. Austerity, privatizations, market opening. It's not conspiracy. It's simple power mechanics. The creditor commands. And once you enter the debt cycle, it's almost impossible to get out, because each new loan is more expensive than the previous one. Each restructuring comes with more conditions. Each default destroys more confidence. The Ottomans never recovered from 1875. They went from crisis to crisis until final dissolution in 1922. How much time do modern superpowers have left? There's a historical pattern that repeats with mathematical precision. Phase 1. Rise through conquest or innovation. The empire generates real wealth, produces more than it consumes, exports more than it imports. Currency is strong because it represents tangible value. Phase 2. Consolidation and stability. The empire reaches its apogee, controls trade routes. Its currency is accepted globally. There's confidence in the system. Phase 3. Decline through privileges. The elite becomes accustomed to luxury. Military spending skyrockets. Systems of privilege are created that drain resources without producing value. The government begins spending more than it collects. Phase 4. Financing through debt. Since revenues aren't enough, the empire begins borrowing. At first it seems to work. Projects are completed. Salaries are paid. The illusion of prosperity continues. Phase 5. Debt trap interest begins consuming increasingly larger percentages of the budget. New loans are taken to pay previous ones. Currency devalues. Inflation rises. The people impoverish. Phase 6. Loss of sovereignty. Creditors begin demanding guarantees, control over customs, control over taxes, control over economic policies. The empire becomes a financial colony of its own bankers. Phase 7. Collapse. The structure becomes unsustainable. Provinces rebel, allies distance themselves, creditors stop lending. The financial system collapses, the empire falls. The Ottoman Empire completed this cycle in 600 years. What phase are we in today? You decide. There's a phrase by poet T.S. Eliot that perfectly summarizes the fall of the Ottoman Empire. This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The Ottoman Empire didn't fall in a day. There was no dramatic moment where everything crumbled. It was a slow, painful process of decades. A default here, a lost province there, one more loan, another devaluation, and suddenly, one day, the most powerful empire across 3 continents simply ceased to exist. Because here's the final truth. When money dies, everything else dies with it. Currency isn't just paper, it's crystallized trust. It's the social pact between government and people. It's the promise that today's work will have value tomorrow. When that promise breaks, when the government prints without backing, when debt accumulates without control, when foreign bankers decide your future, the empire is already dead. It just remains for the body to stop moving. The Ottomans learned this in 1875. The world forgot. And now in 2025, with global debts exceeding $300 trillion, with central banks printing money without precedent, with digital currencies threatening the established order, we're about to relearn the same lesson. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the poem we're writing today sounds dangerously similar to the one the Ottomans wrote 150 years ago. The empire fell, but the lesson remains. External debt and poor governance always end at the same point. Loss of sovereignty, economic collapse, and dissolution. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no "this time is different." Only cause and effect, action and consequence, history and prophecy. And the next empire in our series shows how the most powerful military in the world became its own economic curse, bringing a giant to its knees. Have you subscribed to the channel yet? The next story will show you that no empire is too big to fall.